Hi, my name is Josh. You can find me on Twitter at FYFJosh, and today I am tiering the top quarterbacks for the 2022 fantasy football season. Also, if you like what you see here, please like this video and hit the subscribe button for Front Yard Fantasy. We will continue to put out great fantasy football and dynasty content like this throughout the offseason. So I have 5 tiers that the top quarterbacks will fall into. Just to give you a brief description of each tier, we have the elites. These are quarterbacks that they simply separate themselves from the rest of the pack, and you feel confident that they provide you an advantage over other rosters. The borderline elites is the next tier. You're absolutely starting these quarterbacks in your fantasy lineups every week, and they're difference makers. However, they just don't quite make it into the elite tier, but they're almost there. They just need a couple more things to go their way. Then we have the great starts. These are guys that are going to be weekly starters in most leagues, but they certainly have some question marks that keep them from being considered elite, whether it's, age, uncertainty, or we just haven't seen it yet. Then we have the high upside quarterback twos. These are quarterbacks that you'll be able to throw into your lineup every week with a good matchup, but they all have some serious concerns. If everything goes right, though, these guys absolutely could move up tiers because they're very talented. Then we have the tier of everyone else. These guys will be on a lot of fantasy teams, but I lump these quarterbacks together because I prefer not to start them. Sure, they all become more valuable in a 2 quarterback or super flex league, but I do believe all these players more or less belong in a tier together. All right, so let's get started. We are going to start with the elite tier, and I have 3 guys I'm going to be putting into the elite tier. One might surprise you, I'm not so sure, but the first person we're going to put into the elite tier, I don't think he's going to surprise a lot of people. It's Patrick Mahomes, scoring 21.3 fantasy points per game. He's just an elite talent. The next person we're going to put in here is Josh Allen. We just saw these 2 guys have one of the best play in one of the best NFL games we've ever seen in NFL history. They're both elite tier quarterbacks, and I'm actually going to throw one more person into the elite tier, and it's Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert scored 22.4 fantasy points per game over the course of the season. Josh Allen was above him with 23.7, but he was ahead of Patrick Mahomes himself, and he's still so young and growing in this offense. I love Justin Herbert going into next season. We'll move on to the next tier, and it's the borderline elites. And the first quarterback we're going to put in here is Kyler Murray. He scored 21.5 fantasy points per game, but he did miss a couple games, and that's kind of becoming a trend that we've seen over the course of his career. He's missed games here and there. I love him as a talent, but he's actually just going to fall right into the borderline elite. But he was probably the toughest decision I had to make between the borderline elites and the elites. The person we're going to put after Kyler Murray is Lamar Jackson. I believe Lamar Jackson absolutely still belongs to be in the borderline elite tier. I know a lot of people were disappointed with the season we just saw, but 20 fantasy points per game, absolutely not a bad deal. The next person we're going to put into the borderline elite tier, and, as long as he's back there with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Mike Evans and Rob Gronkowski, I think Tom Brady is going to continue to produce even at age 45. He scored 22 fantasy points per game this season. That's ahead of Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, Patrick Mahomes, a lot of these other quarterbacks. Tom Brady is still elite, or borderline elite. We're putting him to that tier. He's not quite into the elites, but he's got elite talent. If he still had Chris Godwin, I'd be tempted to put him into the elites. After Tom Brady, we are going to put in Joe Burrow. And I think a lot of people, after what we've seen so far from Joe Burrow, might want to put him into the elite tier. I can't quite do that yet. I love his weapons, but 19.6 fantasy points per game, that's less than everyone in the elites and the borderline elites. And then the final person that we're going to put here is Dak Prescott, 20 fantasy points per game, tied with Lamar Jackson. He's still in a great offense. We want to see more passing production, but however, he's still a borderline elite quarterback for me. We're going to move on to the next tier, and the next tier are the great starts. And the first quarterback that's going to go into the great starts tier is Aaron Rodgers, scored 20.8 fantasy points per game this past season. Let's see if he's still with the Green Bay Packers, but regardless, I think there's a very good chance he's tied with Devontae Adams, whatever team he goes to. He's not going to go to a team that's rebuilding. It's going to be a team that's winning now that has weapons. So Aaron Rodgers, he's going to go into the great start with more upside, depending on the situation he finds himself in. And after Aaron Rodgers, we are going to put in Matthew Stafford. I've been really impressed what I've seen with from him with the Rams. He scored 19.4 fantasy points per game. He had a lot of turnover issues, but I think he can figure that out. He obviously has a great connection with Cooper Kupp. He's a great start. After Matthew Stafford, we are going to put in Jalen Hurts, 20.8 fantasy points per game. He had a fantastic fantasy season, but I'm a little bit concerned about how much faith the Philadelphia Eagles actually have in him. After Jalen Hurts, we're going to put in Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson, 17.3 fantasy points per game. We'll see if he's still with the Seahawks. I think the best fantasy production for him is still going to be with the Seahawks, being with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. But regardless, much like Aaron Rodgers, he's not going to go to a bad situation. He's going to go to a team that has weapons, even if he does leave the Seahawks. Russell Wilson still has some rushing upside. I'm putting him in the great start tier. Two more guys I'm going to put in the great start tier. The first one's going to be Deshaun Watson. I know he didn't play this past season, and just regardless, we'll take away the off the field issues. If we look back to 2020, he had 23.1 fantasy points per game. Josh Allen this year led all quarterbacks with 23.7. So this just shows that Watson has upside when he's on the field. He would have been the second highest scoring quarterback over this year if he played and had 23.1 fantasy points per game. So, regardless of what team he's on, Deshaun Watson, he's got more upside than even the great start tier. And the last person I'm going to put into the great start tier is Trey Lance. He only started 2 games, but he did show elite rushing upside, and I trust this offense. If they decide to make the commitment and fully let Trey Lance take over the starting role as quarterback, he has so much upside, and I'm going to end up having him in a lot of leagues because of that upside. After the great starts, we're going to move on to the high upside quarterback 2s. And the first quarterback that belongs in here is Kirk Cousins, 18.8 fantasy points per game. He was actually a tough one. I think a lot of people are a little too low on Kirk Cousins. I considered putting him in the great start, but I think he actually belongs more here in the upside quarterback 2s. After Kirk Cousins, we are going to put in Justin Fields. Fields started 9 games for the Bears, and it was a pretty pathetic start to the year, to be honest. However, he did show up with some upsides toward the end of the season. So Matt Nagy was fired, so I think there's a lot of untapped potential with Fields here. After Fields, we are going to put in Ryan Tannehill, 15.8 fantasy points per game. This was a disappointing season for a lot of people. Were thinking he was going to be a back-end quarterback 1, and a lot of people drafted him that way. Can't consider him that this season, but he is a high upside quarterback 2. After Ryan Tannehill, we are going to put in Mac Jones, and only 13.2 fantasy points per game, but he impressed the hell out of me this season. If he could just take the next step in this Patriots offense and they get him a couple or more weapons, I could absolutely see him breaking into the next tier. After Mac Jones, we are going to put in Derek Carr, 15.1 fantasy points per game. This man just produces year in and year out. He's an high upside quarterback 2. And then the last person we're going to put into the high upside quarterback 2 category is Tua Tagovailoa. Only 13.9 fantasy points per game. He dealt with some injury concerns throughout the season, but he impressed me. He passed the eye test when I did watch him play for the Dolphins. I think if he can just take the next step, he has some rushing upside. He's got good weapons, Jalen Waddle. I think he has got a lot of upside here still. And then we're going to move on to our tier of everyone else, the everyone else tier. I thought this was kind of funny, but when it comes down to it, these guys, I think, belong lumped together. Sure, some of them have upside, but they also have really low floors. And the two I'm going to start talking about here are 2 rookies from the previous season, Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson. I combine them because, believe it or not, they both had the same exact fantasy points per game during their rookie season, 11.7 fantasy points per game. Pathetic for the quarterback position. Trevor Lawrence himself started every game. We wanted to see more upside from these guys, but maybe they can take the next step in their second year. After these guys, we're just going to fill this out. Carson Wentz, 15.2 fantasy points per game. After Carson Wentz, we're going to put in Matt Ryan. Disappointing season, but maybe he gets Calvin Ridley back, 13.1 fantasy points per game. After Matt Ryan, Daniel Jones, 15.1 fantasy points per game. Jared Goff, 13.9 fantasy points per game. Baker Mayfield, 12.9 fantasy points per game. Then Jameis Winston, 16.8 fantasy points per game. Now, he was uber efficient, and I don't know if Jameis Winston's really that guy, but, if he's back with the Saints and they get some more weapons in there, Jameis Winston might be the first guy out of all these guys that can move up into the high upside quarterback 2s. And I kind of pair Jameis Winston with Taysom Hill because they're both on the Saints. And just like Jameis Winston, he has a lot of upside. He wasn't the starter the entire season, but he did look good as the starter, but he isn't exactly a refined quarterback. After Taysom Hill, we are going to put in Jimmy Garoppolo, and I just think there's a really good chance that the 49ers decide to move on, and we just don't know if Jimmy Garoppolo is even going to be a starter next year. He deserves to be a starter. Let's see what situation he's in. If it's a really good situation, then maybe he could possibly move up a tier. After Jimmy Garoppolo, Davis Mills, 12.1 fantasy points per game, but he impressed me as a rookie. After Davis Mills, Teddy Bridgewater, 14.5 fantasy points per game. Then we'll kind of put in both Taylor Heineke and Ryan Fitzpatrick. Let's see if Ryan Fitzpatrick can get a starting job again, but he has upside. After them, we'll put in Jordan Love. Let's see if Aaron Rodgers leaves and they give Jordan Love the keys to the Green Bay Packers. And then the last person we're going to put in here is Sam Darnold. Disappointing season, 13.1 fantasy points per game. I will say, however, the management came out and said, as when we were protecting Sam Darnold, he played well. So it sounds like they might be looking into giving him another shot as their starting quarterback going into 2022. So that will wrap up this video. Please let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with anything. Have a great day.